Okay. All right, we are recording now. Well, this is lesson 3 of session 2, PowerApps Portals Zero to Hero. We have the opportunity to learn from Francesco Musso today. He will continue showing us the secrets of portal branding. Uh, again, thank you, Francesco, for not only spending time presenting, but also spending a lot of time preparing for this. We really appreciate it. Take it away. It's all you now.
Okay, cool. So apologies, I've not got my camera on, but my internet connection has been pretty rubbish this week. So I thought, if anything, you're going to want to see my screen as opposed to me. So a quick heads up as to what we're going to be going through. So I mentioned last week we're going to look at an inbox kind of solution. So the idea is, with our student management system, we're going to have the chance to, I've not actually added it to the UI yet, but we've got the option to create actions for the students. So from my days in higher education, these might be things like proving you got the grades you said you did. It might be proving you've got the funding to this college, this university. It might even just be something as simple as accepting an invite to register on a course like Portal Zero to Hero. So here's just a quick view of the back end. So we can say a subject, choose which student it's for, rich text editor for the message. We specify whether they need to upload a document as part of this and specify when it's due. So I'm going to give them till a week today. And I can either leave that as draft, so if I need to come back and make any changes to that, I can do. Otherwise, I'm going to change that status reason to requested. What happens within about 30 seconds, my flow is going to run, my Power Automate flow, and send an email to Layla to invite her to come onto the portal and action that request. So see how that looks in the portal. First of all, I'm going to show just the out-of-the-box experience. So entity lists, entity forms, and then you can see what it is we're trying to improve upon. Okay, so I've got some actions. If I want to action one of those, this is the experience you're probably used to, that you click on that, navigate away to a form. You'll see that anything with the rich text editor from the back end looks really ugly on basic forms, entity forms. That's something we can work around with Liquid. So at the moment, I've got basic entity form. I've got the option with a real-time workflow to mark that as completed, or I can respond to that. So if I want to send a message about my Portal Zero to Hero registration, I can attach a file. Sure, you want to see my fetch XML, Victor. And you'll see that builds a timeline. So some pretty useful functionality, but far from anything that is a nice experience or looking pretty. So the first step I'm going to show is my attempt with HTML and Liquid to produce an inbox. So this is prior to any styling whatsoever. All I've done is I've created a web template with some markup using Bootstrap classes to create 2 columns. So if I go back to my inspector, you'll see that that's the main thing that's going on. I've got one column that is saying at medium resolutions, make it 4/12, so 1/3 of the width, or at small resolutions, make it full width, 12/12. So you see, like we saw last week, if we shrink that down past a certain size, then everything starts to collapse. So we see the various inbox folders and then the form. So this is prior to any styling, but again, I've got some pretty useful functionality that you'll see that the selected message is automatically highlighted. If I select another, that'll refresh the page and present this particular, and just after the cache refresh, here's the one I just created in the backend in Dynamics. So I can choose between my open actions, I can see the statuses, the due dates. I can see any that are already in review, so I've set up various statuses for this entity that they can be draft, requested, read, approved, rejected, and I think that's about it. So this completed list, this would show any that have already been approved or rejected. So I've got a condition on there to show a tick or a check mark if it is approved, or a cross if it's rejected, but we'd also see that there in the status reason. So to make that happen with Fetch XML and Liquid, really only a couple of skills involved. So I'll show you the web template in a moment, but it's very much using the Fetch XML tag and ifs. Pretty much everything is done with that. So what I'm trying to say is you get a lot of bang for your buck with very few skills in Liquid. Wrong instance. So what I'm doing, like you've probably seen in the portal already, we've got an ID passed in the URL. That's key. That's how I know which message is selected. That's how I know which to display on the right-hand side. Otherwise, we'd have to do something pretty poor user experience, like start with a blank screen saying, please choose something on the left. So we take that GUID of the student action from the URL, and then we use this line, the entities tag, to go and retrieve that record. So that's all about having something to show on the form. And I mentioned that the rich text editor control doesn't display very nicely on the portal, or sorry, output from those fields don't display nicely on the portal. So I've retrieved this record so that I can print that on screen without using the form. And I'm also going to do a few other things on that. So I'll have access to things like the status reason if I want to do anything funky, any conditions with that. And then in between the HTML, I've got a button that we'll activate later. So the idea is that we can get some more room on our screen by collapsing that left-hand navigation and seeing the student action, the message, the full width of the screen. But here's where it's at. It's when you create an advanced find query, as I'm sure we all have, in Dynamics or your model-driven app, there's not really anything particularly clever about this. I've created a saved view. So there are three categories on my inbox. There's open, meaning they've got a status reason of either requested or read, but not provided, approved, rejected. In review is where they have been provided, but one of the tutors has still got to review it. And completed once it's been approved or rejected. So I just build an advanced find the same way I usually would. Make sure that I check which columns are included, because these are the only ones that I'll have access to with Liquid. And then I simply download that Fetch XML. So for my particular use case, that's everything that I need to get my list of messages, my list of completed messages in this example. So you can't just paste it directly into Liquid. You've got to tell Liquid that there's some Fetch XML coming, which is what this tag is about. So I'm opening the Fetch XML tag, and I've just got to give it a name. How do I want to refer to this query? Because I'm going to have something in memory. I'm going to have a variable in Liquid that I can lean on later and loop through that. So what I'm doing here is just outputting everything that I need. So key things like I'm opening the list. So rather than have an empty list, I'm only doing it if that named fetch XML query has something in it. So you might notice I don't have to say if its length is over 0 or anything like that. Just if that's populated, then I want to output some stuff. So I'm starting a list. I'm calling that open actions. And I'm going to start a list group, which is perhaps to show you the raw thing in Bootstrap. So said we've got all these components that we can just lift and shift and use in our code. So that's exactly what I've done here to build my inbox. I've taken a Bootstrap list group, and rather than outputting anything hard-coded or outputting a set number of results, I want to loop through that with liquid and output anything, any messages that are found in that query, output each one of these list group items. Okay, so for each one, so we start the list, we close the list, and then within that, here's what we want to do for each result. So I'm outputting a list of links that has some kind of special markup from liquid. Some of it is for me to style. Some of it is leaving clues for the web API, for jQuery. But the key thing is that I want to be able to link from one of those menu items on the left to that same page with a record selected. So I want to go to that URL and I want to pass it ID equals the GUID of this particular record. Okay, and then as I say, I want to leave some clues. If, for example, I want to target this with an on-click event, or I want to do something special with jQuery, with CSS, with the Portal Web API, what I tend to do is have some data attributes. So like, for example, here where I put the GUID behind the scenes in the HTML, that'll allow me to hook onto this particular message easily. And you may remember when we looked at that inbox that the selected message was highlighted in a particular color. So that is, I'm doing that here with liquid. I'm saying if the GUID of this particular item in the list is the same as the one that's in the URL, give it the active class. So there's nothing magic out of the box that does that with Bootstrap. So we've got to apply it with liquid or by some other means. Another bit of liquid you may not have seen before, and perhaps you have, is the filters. Anywhere you see that pipe character in some liquid output, that's a filter. So in this case, I'm saying rather than show me the full timestamp, I just want to see date, month, and the 4-character year. We can do all sorts with that. So another example would be here where I'm truncating. So in that list of messages on the left, I just bring that back up. I don't want to display tens of lines of text there, just a snippet like what you would see in Outlook. So I'm using that liquid filter to truncate, saying once you get to a certain number of characters, cut it off. So I'm saying strip out any HTML. So for example, I don't necessarily want to include tables in that list. I don't want bullets or anything like that. I just want plain text, and I want to limit it to a certain number of characters. So in this case, 150 characters is what I've gone for. Okay, so the loop is everything with between 4 and end 4. So if there are any results, and 4 meaning for each one that you find, output something. So I've got a header, a bit of the description, a status, and a date. So going from knowing a bit of HTML to being able to do something useful in liquid isn't really that big a leap. As you saw, a lot of what's making up this template is straight from Advanced Find. Okay, so I've then got a separate query for any that are in review. So much the same thing, but with a different status reason. Same for the closed. And then here's a nice easy win. I didn't have to output anything custom. I didn't have to rebuild anything to get that add comment functionality, the upload functionality, the timeline. That's all just having used an out-of-the-box basic form, previously known as an entity form. So I just want to get this one tab from this one form for that entity. And I provided some actions on there. So I've got a real-time workflow. And in the metadata, I've got the timeline enabled. So that's what gives me that out of the box functionality that I'm leveraging. So that, as an example, is how it looks behind the scenes. It has got some CSS, but nothing that I've written. So that's purely what you get out of the box with Portals and with Bootstrap. So before we move past Liquid, can we see if there's any questions so far, please? I'll take that as a no.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything.
Okay, cool. Right, so as the next step, let's see how this looks with some CSS applied. So what I've tried to do is mimic the Outlook look and feel a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my same web template. I've cheated and created some CSS earlier, so I'm just going to uncomment that. We can go spend a bit of time on going through what that actually means. So we've got the same markup, but it's got hopefully a much nicer look and feel. So we've not got, for example, all those HTML tags shown in the body. We've not got the out of the box form. I'm purely using the bits of the form that I'm interested in, which are the form actions and this timeline. I've left myself a few clues. So for example, there are some things I want to do with the Portal Web API. There are some things that I want to do with jQuery, but for now I've just put the pieces in place. One of the things you can get a bit carried away with when you get started with CSS are things like the hover states, transitions, any animations. For me, that was with this. So when we're selecting which message we want to look at, just try to make it quite inviting to interact with. The idea when we apply the jQuery is that these will be expandable, so you can see any messages that are in review and any messages that are completed. But you'll see, again, we've got a bit more of our functionality. In line with the way Outlook works, when something is unread, it's going to have this blue header. And once it's marked as read, which is something we'll do with the Portal Web API, then it'll go to the usual black heading. So we've got two that are blue because as far as the back end is concerned, these are unread. Once we mark them as read, as I say, that's when they'll update. So there's not a massive amount done with CSS, but perhaps show you a few things that we didn't cover last time. So this is an anchor tag, in other words, a hyperlink within HTML. And if I show you here the hover state, so anything where I've got :hover is what happens when someone's mousing over that particular item. So I've said that I want to have the shadow, I want to scale it up. So that particular property, transform scale, is the reason when I mouse over it that it grows. So I've said that I want to scale it up by 1.05. If I wanted to see other scales, looks hideous, but as an example, it's just a matter of changing a few figures there in the CSS. And what makes that smooth, so if I just turn that off for a moment, you'll see now that just kind of jumps around as it changes shape. So the transition property basically tells the browser, I want you to animate this change. So even though it's quite a quick duration, you'll see it kind of grows into place. Can't think of a particularly better way to put that, but that could be with many things. I've done it with scale. It could be fading in from color to grayscale. It could be fading in from sharp to blurred. I don't think why you'd ever want to do this, but just as an example. So see, only when it's active or it's hovered over does that take effect. And also, again, really just trying to mimic the styles of Outlook to provide a familiar experience. Applied that border to the left-hand side to show the selected item. So CSS really is just the skin around this. So as you can see, the functionality is very much as it was. It just looks a bit smarter. So in a moment, we'll apply jQuery, which will give us our hints for the Portal Web API, and it'll allow us to expand and collapse these sections and to use this button to expand and collapse this sidebar. So again, I'm going to cheat and just uncomment some things that I had done before.
It's the blue piece away, you know.
Yeah, this is my Tracy Island. Except they probably remember where they put everything, and I didn't. Okay, so for anyone that's not seen jQuery before, it looks relatively similar to our CSS in terms of the selectors that we use. So this is part of what I'm talking about, where I've left myself clues in the markup in the HTML. So I knew that I wanted a way to expand the list of open messages. So I've given that an ID in the HTML of expand open, likewise with expand in review, expand completed. And then this bit of jQuery, I'm not going to great detail because of course my session isn't on jQuery, but it's kind of integral to the functionality we've put together. But slide toggle means that if it's already open, it will slide to a close. If it's already closed, it will slide to an open. And that prevent default, as you probably see when you get into the sessions with Ulrike, etc., that just stops when you click on a link. It stops the default behavior. So in other words, what it would usually try and do is navigate you somewhere, or if you hadn't provided a destination, it would just refresh the current page, which we don't want. I've then got a markers red function. So when I click the link with an ID of global markers red, that will take the main action that's selected on screen and change its status reason using the web API to red. So I've used Omar's awesome Portal Web API helper in the XRM toolbox. If anyone's not seen that, well worth checking out. Saves a lot of time. So this all within one interface has given me, allowed me to choose which entity I want to enable for the web API, enable it, which attributes I want to set up. Once I save that, that creates all my site settings behind the scenes in the portal. Be sure to turn this option on to enable error tracking. I see disabled because it's already enabled, but that allows to see if anything goes wrong. Like, for example, you've got a permissions failure or there's some kind of business rule in Dataverse that stops your Portal Web API function. This will allow you to go and see that in the console. But also super helpful is it gives you a stub, kind of, if you want to send any code to the Portal Web API, here's a starting point. So it's taken into account the entity that I've selected. Here's the schema name, so I don't have to go and look it up. Here's the format. So I want to update a record. It's telling me that it'll need a GUID and which attribute I want to update. And a bit of a template for any values that I want to send. So really, it's taken a heck of a lot of the guesswork out for me. And you'll see there's placeholders, whether I want to create a record, update just a single property, delete, or delete just a single property. So super helpful. All really you've got to do then to make use of that is wrap it in a function and add an on-click event, which again, not for my session, but as a heads up, that's what these things are for. So add an on-click event to that particular link. When it's clicked, prepare this data, send it to the web API. So I can see it's going to my entity called student actions, and request.params.id is my GUID that I'm passing in the URL. So that's kind of key to the whole thing working, that I've got the GUID, the GUID, however we call it around the world, the unique identifier of that particular student message. So that's saying that it'll, that's the URL to update that message. Here's what I want to update it with. So I want to change the status reason to red in this case. And when you use the Portal Web API, there's no immediate effect as far as the end user is concerned. There's nothing visual about it. It doesn't provide any feedback as such. So what I've put here in the success message are just a few things to make it appear visible that there's been a result. So I've said, just before you send it, there's a bit of a cheat, change the text that was saying mark as read to the word saving, then perform the operation, and if it succeeds, I want to change the status reason in the left-hand menu to red. So the Portal Web API is taking care of it in the database, but there's nothing on the portal end to say this has happened. So this is my kind of cheats way around that. So until the user refreshes, I want to provide some feedback. So change the status reason to red. Remove the class that said unread. So remember we said the heading would change from blue to black. This is what I'm looking out for in the styling. If it's got unread, style it blue. If it's not got the class of unread, style it black. And then the mark as read button, fade that out. That's pretty much it, apart from actually collapsing the sidebar. So we've again got an on-click function to say when we click my collapse sidebar button, which we'll see again in a moment, but when we click this button, what I want to happen is this whole left sidebar collapse. The idea being more space to see this part of the template. Let's see that in action. Obviously, if anything was going to go wrong, it would be now that everybody's watching. So a couple of things it might have gone too quick for you to notice, but I've done a few other things with jQuery, like I've grouped these buttons together. So otherwise, this one I've just I added with Liquid. It's not part of the form, so I've just I've gathered them together using jQuery. I've said go and find wherever that markers completed button lives and pop it in next to the markers read button. So this is a custom thing with Portal Web API, whereas this is the out of the box config using a real-time workflow. So first things first, I can collapse that sidebar if I want some more room. So if this was, for example, a much lengthier message. So that bit of jQuery is saying, as we saw a moment ago, collapse that left-hand menu and change this from what is currently 8/12 of the width So if you're wondering why I'm saying 12ths, it's just because Bootstrap's grid is a 12-column grid. And when I expand that, it moves to 12 twelfths. So in other words, full width. So likewise, I've done something similar to collapse the in review actions. So if I click that chevron, I can see any messages that I've got in review. And if I click this chevron, I can see any that I've got completed already. The count on each one is probably worth mentioning. So that is also to do with liquid. So when I've done my fetch XML query, so I'm afraid you'll get used to me drowning in Windows. Useful property with liquid called .size. So what I can say is of my query, so in this example, the in review actions query, results.entities.size tells me how many results there were. But you can also use it to test the length of some of your fields. So maybe you want to say if a text field has got more than 100 characters, do something special with it, or maybe if you just want to test it's got something useful in, so it's got more than a character, or maybe more than 10 characters, whatever the case may be. So if you use it with your query, it's about how many records there are, or if you use it on a field, specifically a text field, it would tell you the length of that string. And I say you can use that then in your if statements with operators to say, for example, greater than, less than, equals to. Okay, so once you're familiar with liquid, it becomes very much like a Lego set, really. It's just about which bits do you want to plug in, what do you want to use. So if the demo gods are shining down on us, what's going to happen when I click mark as read is the status reason, might take a second or two, but the status reason of this particular student action is going to change from requested to read when I click mark as read, sorry. So it took a few seconds, as you saw, but now the mark as read button has disappeared because it succeeded, and you'll see that the status now is read, whereas before it was requested. And you may notice as well that that header's changed now from blue to black. So it's not a massive visual difference, but it's just trying to make it look familiar with the Outlook styling, as I said. So I've marked it as read. The next time I come to this template, should already see it as read. I could then, for example, upload the document that it's asking for. So I could repeat that for however many things. Given more time, I'd change that from add comments to something more useful. But I could add as many attachments as I want. But when I'm actually finished with that, I'm going to click mark as completed, which, as I said, is a real-time workflow that is going to change the status of this from currently read, but equally could be requested, to provided. So that's when it lands in this review folder. So what I'm expecting now is when I click mark completed, that the page refreshes with the out of the box form functionality, and we get our message moving from the open actions to the in review actions.
This is pretty incredible, Francesco. We have one hand up here. I think Pavam Mani has a question. If you want to unmute yourself, Pavam, and maybe pose the question.
Yes, Victor. Hi, Francesco. This is Pavan. So I would like to ask, like, we have this much kind of code. So is there any possibility that we can debug such thing? Like we can debug the Power App portal in our local machine running as local host?
No, afraid not that I'm aware of. I think that's more like what was available back when it was ADX Studio, but now it's the software as a service. There's no access to run locally that I'm aware of.
Okay, then how can we debug this code, this much lines of code? So because for a developer perspective, I think debugging should be the best option because to find troubleshoot the issue. So your suggestion on that?
Certainly, when you're using the Portal Web API, that option that I showed to enable inner error tracking, that's definitely a useful one. So if I, for example, let's say I remove the permission to edit student actions. So then I'm going to have a Portal Web API function that I don't have, the user doesn't have permission to complete. And you can see for it as an example what the error looks like. So I'm going to say I don't want them to be able to make changes to this entity. Really clear the cache, the browser cache as well. So now let's see what happens when I mark that as red. So I get the forbidden message, but that's about all I would see if I enabled that option. Whereas now I can see when I click through to them, it's specifically giving me the permission that's missing. So the reason is that I've not got the update function on the CFlow student action table.
Okay.
So that's how I can get useful information when the web API is concerned. I guess for the rest, for things like my jQuery, I can debug in the usual way for that. Or in the portal config, sorry, not the portal config, in the Maker Studio. Perhaps another useful thing would be to turn off custom errors. So this would give you the yellow screen of death and the whole dump like you would perhaps expect to see in a coding environment rather than.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So suppose there was a problem in our jQuery.
Yeah.
So in that case, how can we check this thing the same way?
Yeah, you would need to build the debugging into your jQuery, as far as I understand it. Just apologize, I'm not a developer, but to the best of my understanding, I would do things like put breakpoints in there and build in those options for debugging.
Okay.
I think that debugger comment will work. Debugger comment and then you will open at 12. That should work.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could add, so yeah, JavaScript debugging would be based on the developer tools of whatever browser you're using, you know, and of course you rely on console logs, debugger to track along. But there is a plugin out there. I'll post the link on the chat window if I find it before the end of the session, to pull down all of the website content to your local machine. It's a VS Code extension, and allow you to make changes there. You still have to deploy it to the server, to the service, if you will, but at least you'd be able to make changes in your local machine and commit it to source control. You cannot run it from your local machine, but you can make changes to it from your local machine.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Vic. I don't know if it's any use to see, but just trying to show the whole experience of what I've put together, maybe to help think of solutions that you might need to work through. So when I set that student action earlier to a status of requested, this is an example of the email that gets fired out. So it includes a deep link to the portal. So here's the one. So it includes the ID of the message we want them to check. I'm logged into many different profiles, so I'll just paste that in. So here's an example of that email that I've just clicked from. In fact, I could have done it straight from here, but you'll see it takes me directly to having that message selected. And I can do the things that I saw before, like mark that as read, mark it as completed, add the comments. Do tell me if this is pointless to show. Happy to take any feedback on board. Here's my solution, which I'm happy to share along with the templates. So it's building on Victor's managed solution. I'm bringing in activities, portal comments, and I've got my real-time workflow that I'm using in the template to change that status to completed. And then here's the flow that sends out those emails. Again, just in case it's any help for thinking out your solutions. So I'm looking out for creator update on the student actions table. I'm only interested in changes to the status code column, and only if that status code, the status reason, is requested. So for example, if it's created in draft status, we don't want to send anything out. Useful to have both those, so that says only apply to creator update when the status reason is requested, but there could be other things that change. So let's say it's already requested, the email's already gone out, but I changed the due date. I don't necessarily want that email to go out again. So that's what I'm saying here. I'm only interested if the change happens to be on that status code, status reason column. Then I'm converting the dates from UTC to my local time. The reason being that I want to include the due date, and sometimes I've been caught out with Power Automate flows where there's an hour's difference potentially between UTC and UK time, so sometimes the date will appear a day different because I've set it, for example, it's running at midnight and it's seen it as 11 PM the day before, and therefore gets things a little bit wrong. So I'm creating the email message from the owner of the record to the contact. And not the fanciest of things, but I've set the due date on the email. I've got the body from that student action record, that rich text editor field that we saw. And then I'm providing a hyperlink, as we saw, that takes you directly to that inbox with that message selected. So for most of your solutions, you probably use question mark ID equals for the GUID if you want it to be in line with the rest of the portal. So pretty much anywhere that you use in entity forms and web forms and you're navigating between the two, it's that URL parameter that they pass the GUID in. And then pop in a quick reminder of the due date. setting that regarding the student action. That's something I often forget when I'm creating my flows, and then I wonder, it looks like the email hasn't been created. So go and look at the record. I want to see it in the timeline, and it's that regarding field for that entity that's going to make that link. We've got the send email action, and then finally, I just want to populate that with what date it was requested. So rather than require that the user change the status and set the date, the flow does that for them. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. Any questions?
We have a couple of people with their hands up. I think Pavan has the hands up as well, and Nor, I believe. Let's do Nor first, and then Pavan following. So
Yes,
Nor,
thank
if
you
you
so
want to
much.
just
Thank you so much, Francesco, for this. This is pretty amazing. I just want to know these two buttons, mark as completed and mark as read. Can you please explain where have you set them and how the workflow is being executed from them?
Yes, absolutely. So markers read is done with the Portal Web API. So that's I'm looking out for just to show you that we have various options. So that is back in the web template. So I've added some markup just with HTML. In fact, if I find that one first of all. Yeah, so I created a button, just typing in some HTML. I knew that I wanted to add an event listener to this, an on-click event. So I'll give it an ID, so I've got something to refer to. So then in jQuery, I've added the event listener to say, when global markers read is clicked, then run this function.
Got it. Yep. Thank you.
And then to give it that styling where it looks like a toolbar, again, I've just put some markup in the HTML, but then I've styled it with CSS to just color it a bit differently from the rest of the page.
Right.
So this section, the markers completed, this is out of the box config. So I've created a real-time workflow with the classic workflow, so to speak. As in not a Power Automate flow, but an old-fashioned workflow. So I think just about the only criteria for that is that it has to be on demand. It doesn't matter anymore, I don't believe, whether it's real time or background, unless you want to see some instant results on the page. Okay, so I've got that running. And then to actually tie it up to the form, what I've got is in the additional settings. You see you've got the option to add a workflow. When you've done so, any that are available on demand for that entity, you can choose from the list. So this is where the text for the button's coming from. And I like to add the advanced settings as well, so that I can put a custom message in there rather than, I think it just says something like successfully initiated or something not very friendly like that out of the box. And then also I'm choosing here whether I wanted that form action bar to appear above the form or below the form. And I can specify whether it's justified to the left or to the right.
Got it. Thank you so much.
No problem. And then another useful option that I think is quite well hidden is this filter criteria. So you can choose in which scenarios you want that button to appear. So for example, if somebody was on my form and they looked at a completed action, it wouldn't make sense to show the markers completed button for that. So I've put some fetch XML in there to say, don't show it unless it is requested or read.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I think we can call actions also in a similar fashion. Custom actions could also be called.
The less I look, I'm not sure we can call custom actions through the web API yet. I would assume that it will come eventually. There is how I should say this. The portal's web API is not in parity with the Dataverse web API yet. I'm not sure if that's the vision from Microsoft. It would be great to call actions, but I don't think at this stage we can. I may be wrong, but when I tried, I think back 2-3 months ago, we were not able to call actions yet through the web API.
I may be wrong with this one, but I'm quite sure I read that if you do that in the way that I just showed, that you're calling a workflow, that from the workflow you can fire the action.
Yeah, I think my mistake there is the unbound action. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a workaround that can work.
Yeah.
And about the portal web API, I was working on it, and even when you try to mark the message as read, so it took around 3 or 4 seconds. And even we are just updating a single field. So anybody knows why does it take so much time? Like 3-4 seconds for a single attribute is a lot of time.
Yeah, so it seems to be, from my experience at least, it's the first time after you've cleared the cache that it takes that amount of time. From then onwards, it's almost instant.
Right.
So if I can't remember if I've cleared the cache in the last few minutes, but if it is, then you'll see, so a moment ago, it takes 3-4 seconds, and then any subsequent times after that. So I appreciate it as a drawback, definitely. But also I find it useful to provide some feedback on screen.
Right.
Well, what's going on with that one? But if I maybe show you from my Spotify example, if that's not doing the trick. But yeah, I think it's a good point that you make. Something you need to be aware of, definitely, because I've often found before I've got a client demo, it works well to just make sure kind of the portal's warmed up and you've clicked at least one of the items that's available with the web API. As I say, after that, any subsequent ones are much quicker.
And I was having this issue a lot because I am getting the refresh data every time by creating a filter in the fetch XML on the created on to get the latest data. So every time I press a button, the page gets refreshed in order to get the latest data. So that's also the main reason to, the time or the lag of 3-4 seconds for every API call.
Yeah, so this example is a similar thing where it's deleting a record this time rather than just changing a status. I think first time, like you said, does take a few seconds.
Yeah.
And then don't know how better to word it other than it's warmed up and it is quicker from then onwards. So now if I'm going to end up undoing all my demo data, but yeah, now if I choose that I want to remove this like, it's quite a bit quicker.
Yeah.
It's the exact same operation, same amount of data, same back end, but everything else. So in fact, if I just maybe go and like a song now, but everything is much quicker from that point onwards.
But now if you refresh the cache, then it will take again the same amount of time.
Yes, and I prefer to only clear the cache outside of what I consider working hours for the business. I guess for this example, it's a poor one because something like Spotify wouldn't really be down at any particular time. But yeah, you want to be careful to choose your time when you're clearing the cache, in my opinion.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Pavan, go ahead and pose your question if you still have your line. I didn't know if the hands up is from the first question or if it's a new one. I guess you don't have a new question, so I think we're good to go. Thanks, Francesco, one more time for dedicating time for us today. Before we go, I wanted to show Francesco's blog, and Francesco, feel free to add on if you have any other contact information that you want to share with folks here. Okay, so this is francomusso.com. That's where Francesco publishes all his cool stuff. Go ahead and take a look and sign up to his blog and maybe contact him on LinkedIn. I put the links on the chat window as well with all your information, Francesco. Feel free if you feel comfortable sharing email, contact, or if just LinkedIn and blog is good enough. But it's available on the chat. I'll do it one more time. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this for us. Next week, though, we have Ulrike Akaba. I hope I said her name correctly, but she's gonna extend the talk, but more on the subject of HTML and out-of-the-box components. So she's gonna be teaching us a little bit more in that particular context, and she's gonna do it in 2 weeks. So starts next week, and then the following, she'll be talking about it. I'm not sure if you saw any of her material before, but this is one example, like on a left side bar that shows records, and then you click on a record, you see a form, and then you can make changes on the form there and navigate to another record. So she will show things like that. One that I personally use was this customized sign-in page. If you worked on portals, you've seen it. That it's I wouldn't say quite hard, but it's not very evident how you can get it done. So she'll show us things like that for the next couple of weeks. So I'm pretty excited to have her on in this particular session as well. So it should be very, very good next week. Before we go, I wanted to let you know that I'm organizing an event alongside with a few other folks, and I'll talk about them shortly here. But it's called the PowerApps Developer Bootcamp. This is a pro dev bootcamp in different areas in the Power Platform. We're gonna talk about ALM for Power Platform. We're gonna be talking about PCF development, and then a few other things, but in the context of pro development, not necessarily your citizen development strategies, but more pro development. So the event starts on the 15th, and then we have events on the 22nd and the 29th. So the organizers are Danish Naglekar, who's written this PCF book, okay, extending Power Apps using PCF. And Dennis is also the creator of the VS Code extension for PCF and a XRM toolbox that facilitates creation and deployment of PCF components. Then we have Yash. You probably saw a lot of, you've seen in a lot of his Power Automate videos and other stuff in the network. Samit Saini, if you don't know him, I don't know where you live. So Submit has done a lot of work for Power Platform and a little bit of hybrid citizen development and pro development. Then Diana, I call Diana the PCF queen. So they both Diana and Danish, they have a lot of knowledge in the PCF area, and of course Arpit is assisting us on the event as well. But as far as speakers though, if you look at this page, and I'll throw this link here, you see that so far we have, awesome speakers presenting. I think Scott Duro is going to be presenting as well. Danish, Diana, um, Reza. So it's heavyweight stuff. Ivan Fico. This was a highlight of the year last year when we did did events online, when we started doing events online. This was by far the event that had the most attendees signed up and the most engagement at the time. So yeah, here's Scott Duro, my friend from Brazil, Renato Romão. He's like the godlike speaker on Power Virtual Agents. So there is a wealth of knowledge here on this event. And if you haven't signed up, I would encourage you to sign up. And if you consider presenting, you have a few more days, I think, until the end of this week to submit your proposal for speakers, for presenting a session, I should say. So that's all I have to say today. Really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for sharing the words with your friends and letting them know about this program, and also about the Power Community events that we host on Saturdays all the time. Check out the other events. There are events. I think we just completed one for Business Central, which was really big as well. We have a few more for FinOps, and then other events, certification events. There's a lot of things. There are a lot of events already booked. So again, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Don't forget to stay tuned to the emails. I'll send more emails. I'll connect with Francesco to get his solution on what he presented today, so we can update what we got available for you to download, and then we'll be talking more. If you have questions, you can post them here in the chat window. You can contact me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Whichever way is the easiest for you, just contact me. I'll try to answer as fast as possible. And the recording will be available today at some point, so folks that were not able to connect, or folks that saw it and were overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge that was shared, you're going to be able to watch again today at some point. All right. Thank you much. Take care, and more power to you. See you next week. All right.